The night above Val Seren was alive with silver storms, great arcs of light flashing across a sky made of liquid glass. The capital of the alien world shimmered below, domes of metal breathing with soft blue veins of power. At its heart stood the royal palace, tall as a mountain and carved from crystal that hummed with old laws. Its windows glowed with the pulse of the planet's core. Its balconies hung like frozen wings over the sleeping city, and on one of them sat Princess Illyra, the girl who had not walked in 10 years. She watched the storms the way some people watch their own heartbeats, calm but secretly hoping for thunder. Her hover chair drifted forward on silent repulsors, her white robe spilling over her legs that had long since forgotten the weight of movement. Her silver eyes caught the flicker of lightning. Each spark reflected the same unspoken question she asked every night. What kind of world builds miracles for everyone but its own heir? Her people called her blessed, but in her chest she felt only the slow ache of chains. The priest said it was divine will that she remained still, that the law of stillness preserved royal purity. No machines in the flesh, no tampering with the sacred body. And yet deep beneath her skin something cold and metallic whispered every time she tried to dream. Far above the palace spires, a burning light cut across the clouds. A small human craft spiraled through the storm, its hull tearing open under alien lightning. The pilot fought the controls, alarms howling. His name was Marcus Hale, a human, soldier-engineer from the Terran expedition that had vanished 3 years ago near this sector. He had come not for war but to find the missing. His ship broke through the storm shell and fell like a dying bird, plasma wings trailing smoke and red fire. The crash sent tremors through the lower gardens. Guards shouted orders, drones buzzed from their towers. But Illyra did not call for them. She turned her hover chair toward the window and whispered to herself, "Not again." Down below, Marcus crawled from the wreckage, his uniform torn, one side of his face streaked with blood and rain. The alien air stung his lungs. He staggered through the strange gardens glowing with crystal vines. He saw statues of winged beings, murals carved with stories of light and silence. This world was beautiful but wrong, too quiet, too controlled. He slipped through broken gates and found himself near a balcony lit by pale lamps. When he looked up, he saw her, the princess, floating like a ghost of silver, staring down at him with eyes that glowed faintly against the stormlight. For a moment, neither spoke, the human bleeding and the alien watching from her chair. Marcus raised his hands slowly, his translator chip still flickering from damage. "I come in peace," he tried to say, but the words came out rough, static-laced. Illyra tilted her head, the strange accent of old Earth reaching her ears like a forgotten echo. She had seen humans only in archives, their wars, their machines, their chaos. Her priests called them danger-made flesh. Yet this one looked nothing like a monster, only lost, wounded, real. The guards were coming. She could hear their metal boots striking the corridors if they found him. They would execute him for trespassing. Illyra's pulse raced. 10 years of being still, 10 years of obeying. And now, with one human standing in her storm, she felt something break open inside her. She pressed a control rune and lowered her balcony shield. Marcus climbed up with effort, his breath fogging in the cold air. The chair drifted closer. She studied the burn on his arm, the tools on his belt, the small med scanner blinking faint green. "You should not be here," she said softly. The words carried weight like a prayer. Marcus shook his head. "Neither should you be trapped," he replied, his eyes falling to the sleek lines of her hover chair, the faint shimmer at her lower spine where the robes parted. He frowned. "May I?" he asked, lifting the scanner slightly. She hesitated but nodded. The beam ran down her back, displaying data in human code he barely remembered. What he saw made his stomach tighten. This wasn't healing tech. It was a neural inhibitor, old design, meant to block signals. "Someone did this to you," he said under his breath. Her voice was calm but sharp. "I was told it saved my life." Marcus looked up. "It didn't save you. It locked you." Her lips trembled, the first crack in the mask she wore before everyone else. She whispered, "It is the law," he whispered back. "It's a prison." The guards reached the hall, calling her title, their spears crackling with power. Marcus moved to retreat, but she raised her hand. Wait. Her voice carried command born of bloodline. The guards froze at the doorway. She turned her chair, the glow of her eyes fierce and steady. I require silence, she declared. By royal right. They hesitated, then obeyed, leaving the corridor in uneasy confusion. When they were gone, the thunder rolled like applause across the sky. Lyra faced Marcus again, her tone no longer royal but human. What do you see when you look at me? He answered without thought. I see someone who's been sabotaged. Her breath caught. No one had ever said that word aloud. She leaned closer. Her hair brushed his shoulder. Then help me understand. The storm cracked open above them, lighting their faces in flashes of blue fire. Marcus knew then that this meeting would cost them both more than they could imagine. But he also knew something else. In every broken machine he'd ever seen, the hardest part wasn't the metal, it was the will to repair. And in her eyes he saw that will burning bright, stronger than the lightning. The night held its breath as the human and the alien faced each other, and somewhere far below the old laws began to tremble. Rain fell like shards of glass over the palace that night. The storm had not slept since the humans' arrival, as if the sky itself wanted to witness what came next. Marcus sat near a flickering heater in the abandoned maintenance chamber beneath the east tower. His hands trembled as he adjusted the med scanner. Every few seconds he glanced toward the door where the princess sat silently in her hover chair, her face pale in the cold light. She had guided him there herself through hidden corridors only she remembered. The halls had whispered as they passed, the walls alive with the hum of ancient laws. She watched him in silence, her voice finally breaking through. You said it is not a cure but a prison. Marcus nodded. The inhibitor attached to your spine was built to block motion and nerve flow, not heal it. Someone wanted to make sure you'd never walk again. Her fingers tightened on the armrest, a spark of anger flashing in her eyes before she hid it behind calm. Who would do such a thing to a child of the throne? She asked quietly. He looked up at her. Probably the one who stands to gain the most by keeping you in that chair. Her lips parted slightly, understanding dawning. My uncle, she whispered. Her voice carried the sound of betrayal she had never allowed herself to feel before. He rules as regent until I can walk the 7 steps at the right of heirship. Without that right, I cannot claim the crown. Marcus leaned forward. Then he has every reason to keep you broken. He ran the scanner again, decoding the old human-like architecture buried within the alien code. Someone had used hybrid tech, a forbidden cross of bio and machine, something neither human nor Valsaren native should have access to. Lyra closed her eyes, memories flickering through her mind. The explosion that shattered the throne hall 10 years ago, the screams of the attendants, her mother's final breath, and the sharp pain before she awoke in darkness. They told me it was a miracle that I lived, she said softly. They told me the gods spared me. Marcus lowered the device. Sometimes miracles are forged by those who fear losing power. Her gaze lingered on him, studying his face, his steady hands, the faint scars on his wrist. She saw no arrogance there, only quiet fire, the kind of strength that comes from surviving too much. Can you undo it? She asked at last. He hesitated. The truth hung heavy. If I had the right tools, maybe, but my ship is wrecked, my supplies are gone, and the inhibitor's key code is royal grade. It would take a miracle to break it clean. She exhaled slowly. Then perhaps we must make one. Her tone shifted, firm and alive, as if the storm outside had moved into her veins. Marcus met her eyes, uncertain but drawn into her resolve. They scavenged what they could from the wreckage that night. He showed her how to strip power cells from drone husks, how to convert control bands into muscle coils, how to weave fiber cables into artificial tendons. She was a quick learner, curious and fearless. She laughed once when a spark burst from a loose wire, a sound he had never heard from her before, light and almost human. It echoed in the cold hall and made something in his chest warm. By dawn they had a crude design mapped on a slab of glass, a pair of lightweight braces powered by neural intent through a wrist interface. It wasn't perfection, but it was hope. When the sun rose, painting the crystal windows gold, Elira looked at the incomplete exo-braces, her hands hovering over them as though they were sacred relics. "They are ugly," she said with a small smile. Marcus grinned. "Ugly things often save lives." She nodded slowly, then looked up at him. "Do you think I will walk again?" He paused, choosing his words carefully. "I think you already have. You just haven't taken the step yet." They waited until the palace slept again before trying, in the secret garden under the east wing. The air smelled of wet stone and white flowers that glowed faintly under the stars. Elira sat on the old bench, the frame attached to her legs, the cables trembling with soft hums of power. Marcus knelt in front of her, his voice steady. "I've synced the control ring to your pulse. Think of movement not as command but as memory. Remember how it felt, not how it looked." She closed her eyes. The sound of her heart filled her ears. She thought of sunlight, of running across the gardens as a child, of her mother's laughter echoing in the halls. The frame shivered, the first pulse of current running through it. Her breath caught, her muscles twitched like forgotten instruments tuning themselves. Marcus adjusted the settings, whispering encouragements under his breath. "You're safe, it's working." The cables brightened faintly, her knees bent slowly, trembling, painfully alive. She gasped and pressed her hands against his shoulders to steady herself. Her feet touched the ground. It wasn't graceful. It wasn't perfect, but it was movement. After 10 years of stillness, the air around her seemed to burst with meaning. Her body shook as tears fell down her cheeks. Her voice cracked. "I can feel it." Marcus looked up at her and smiled softly. "That's not the machine, that's you." The hover chair sat behind them like an empty shell. Lightning flickered across the sky again. The scent of ozone mixed with the sharp tang of metal, and for a moment it felt as if the whole world had paused to witness that single step. Elira looked down at her trembling legs, then at the human who had given her the courage to stand. Her lips trembled. "How did your kind learn to build such miracles?" Marcus stood and helped her balance, his voice quiet. "Humans never learned to build miracles. We learned to survive long enough to make them." She laughed through tears, a fragile sound in the vast silence. The palace bells began to chime, signaling morning prayer. The law of stillness would soon call her back. But something had already changed, something that no priest or decree could undo. Her heart raced with new purpose. She turned to Marcus and said with trembling resolve, "Then let's see how far these legs can carry me." He nodded, hiding the ache in his chest, knowing what this act would cost them both, yet unable to stop himself from believing. Outside, thunder rolled like distant drums, as if the universe itself was holding its breath for the storm that was yet to come. The morning after her first steps, Val Seren seemed brighter, but to Elira it felt heavier, as though the palace itself sensed that something sacred had been broken. In her chamber, she hid the exo-braces under long silk robes, the faint hum of their power buried beneath the sound of her heartbeat. The law of stillness still hung over her like a silent sword. No one must know. Not yet. Not until she was strong enough to stand without fear. Marcus moved through the hidden corridors, careful and quiet, using forgotten maintenance shafts to avoid the guards. Every time he passed a glowing wall script written in the alien tongue, it reminded him that this world was watching. Days turned into a rhythm of secrecy and defiance. By daylight, she played her part. The obedient princess, gentle voice, calm smile, gliding through the palace on her chair while priests bowed and courtiers whispered. But when the halls grew silent, when the moon bled silver through the crystal towers, she rose, her legs trembling at first. Each night stronger than the last, Marcus guided her through slow steps, correcting her balance, adjusting the power feedback. His voice steady, his eyes focused. She followed every word like a prayer. They trained in the old West Gallery, a place forgotten since the war. The floors cracked, mirrors shattered, walls lined with dust-covered statues. Elira looked at her reflection one night and whispered, "I do not recognize her." Marcus stood behind her. "She is the one you were meant to be." She looked down. Her reflection shimmered faintly, a woman between two worlds, flesh and steel. Human design and alien blood. He taught her how to control the neural interface better. Linking the wristband to her spinal signals, she would fall, stumble, crash into his arms and laugh through tears. Frustration burned through her but never lasted long, because she could feel life returning to her muscles, to her breath, to her mind. Marcus told her stories of Earth to distract her from pain. Cities that never slept, oceans that swallowed sunlight, and storms that humans learned to live through rather than hide from. Elira listened with wide eyes, her voice soft. Your people fight nature. Mine bow before it, maybe both are wrong. Marcus smiled faintly. Maybe both are learning. But the palace was changing too. Guards doubled their patrols. Priests spoke in low voices about omens and heresies. A rumor began to move through the servants, a shadow in the east wing, a light that walked. The regent's spies carried word to him, and suspicion grew. One evening, as Elira practiced walking along the colonnade, she froze when she heard footsteps that did not belong to Marcus. A tall figure in dark robes appeared from behind the pillars. Her cousin Varen, eyes sharp as knives, he smiled too easily. My dear cousin, wandering the halls so late, how brave. His tone dripped with mock concern. Elira gripped the pillar to hide her trembling legs. I couldn't sleep, she said softly. The storms have been restless. Varen's gaze lingered on her feet hidden beneath her gown. Then on the faint light at her wrist he raised an eyebrow. Storms, yes. The heavens grow noisy when laws are bent. Marcus stepped from the shadows, his voice calm but firm. The princess required air. Lord Varen turned his smirk toward him. And who are you? Human, her new guard, her mechanic, perhaps something else. Marcus met his stare without flinching. An engineer, nothing more. Varen's smile deepened. Good. Then fix what's broken and remember your place. The family of the crown has no use for human sympathy. He turned and vanished down the corridor, his robes whispering like snakes. When he was gone, Elira sank against the pillar. Her pulse racing, Marcus moved closer. He's suspicious. She nodded. Yes, and he doesn't hide it. Marcus adjusted the power regulator on her wrist. The spark had dimmed from the emotional surge. Next time we train in silence, he said. She nodded again, eyes dark with worry. That night neither of them slept. From the upper towers the priests chanted blessings for the regent. Their voices echoed like threats. Marcus sat by the old heater, tools laid out in neat rows, thinking. The limiter still inside her spine pulsed faintly. Its lock could be broken only with a royal key kept in the vault. If he could get that key, she could walk freely without risk. But the vault was protected by living crystal that reacted to any lie or unregistered code. Impossible without someone of royal blood. The next evening, while calibrating her stride, Elira noticed his distant expression. You're planning something, she said. He didn't deny it. I'm planning how to make you free. She tilted her head. I already feel free. He shook his head. Not yet. As long as that limiter sleeps in your spine, it can wake again. Someone could lock you back in that chair. The thought sent a chill through her heart. She placed her hand on his wrist, her touch light but sure. Then we will get the key. Her words caught him off guard. He looked at her, half expecting fear. But her face was calm, determined, the softness of her alien features replaced by something deeply human. Courage. She smiled faintly. My mother once said a ruler must never wait for miracles. She must walk toward them, even if her legs shake. Marcus felt a strange warmth rise in his chest. Not duty, not admiration, something deeper, something he did not want to name. Outside, lightning forked across the horizon, painting the towers in blinding white. Alarms sounded faintly in the distance, reports of strange activity near the power grids. Elira turned toward the window. The storm mirrors our hearts, she whispered. Marcus followed her gaze. No, he said quietly. The storm is afraid of what comes next. She laughed softly, and in that laughter, the tension of the night eased for a moment. Yet both of them knew that the shadows in the palace were no longer blind. Varen would tell the regent, the priests would speak of blasphemy, and soon the law of stillness would no longer be a cage of words but a blade waiting to strike. As the thunder rolled again, Marcus powered down the workshop lights. Elira walked one last slow circle before returning to her chair. Her legs moved with fluid grace now, almost natural. She looked back at him and said quietly, If they come for us, promise me one thing. Promise you won't run? He met her eyes and answered, I'll run only if it's to protect you. She nodded once, her silver gaze steady. Then we fight together. In the dark palace halls, somewhere unseen, the old songs of the law began to tremble again. Like glass before a coming quake, the storm outside raged louder, and deep in the heart of Val Seren, destiny began to stir. The night of the comet procession arrived like a whisper from fate. Every street of Val Seren glowed beneath floating lanterns that painted the sky in colors too bright for morning. Music rose from the plazas, soft and haunting, while the royal banners rippled under the wind of distant storms. But behind all that beauty, The palace was a nest of watching eyes. Priests and guards moved in silent pairs. The regent had ordered triple patrols. Something about the way the air felt wrong. Something about the way his niece's voice had sounded too alive these past days. Far below the grand halls, in the forgotten corridors where no law dared walk, Marcus and Elira prepared. The plan was simple and impossible. They would reach the vault hidden beneath the Shrine of Ascension, steal the key that controlled her spinal limiter, and escape before anyone noticed. The vault was alive with living crystal that could read blood and intention. Elira's royal signature would open it, but only if her pulse stayed calm and truthful. Marcus checked the power coil in her braces one last time, his fingers trembling slightly as he worked. She caught the motion. "Are you afraid?" He smiled faintly. "I've been afraid since I met you." She tilted her head. "Then why do you stay?" His eyes softened. "Because some things are worth breaking the law for." They moved through narrow shafts and cold tunnels, the sound of celebration echoing faintly above them. The air smelled of incense and static, the palace's ancient heart beating around them like a giant sleeping creature. Elira wore her long ceremonial robe to hide the metallic shimmer of her legs. The neural band pulsed gently around her wrist, the faint blue light hidden under the folds of cloth. She could feel the hum of energy within her. Alive and restless, a part of her wanted to run. Another part wanted to pray. Marcus carried a small emitter built from scavenged drone parts, a crude jammer that would blind sensors for a few minutes at a time, enough to slip through checkpoints. They reached the crystal hallway at the edge of the shrine. Long columns of translucent stone stretched like frozen waterfalls. Every step they took sent a ripple of light through the floor, as if the structure itself breathed in rhythm with them. Marcus moved carefully, his boots silent. His eyes scanning for movement, Elira felt her heart quicken. She closed her eyes for a moment, whispering the old prayer of the throne, words her mother had taught her before the bombing. It steadied her pulse when she opened her eyes. She walked forward with grace, each footstep measured. At the center of the vault chamber floated a pillar of living crystal. Inside it shimmered the key, a shard of pure energy shaped like frozen lightning. It pulsed in time with her heartbeat. Marcus looked at it with awe. "It's beautiful," she said softly. "It's dangerous," he replied and reached for his tools. But before he could touch the surface, voices echoed down the corridor. Too close, too fast, they froze. Elira turned toward the shadows. It was Varen and his guards, torches of white flame lighting their armor. He had known. Perhaps he'd followed them all along. "Cousin," he said as he stepped into the chamber, his tone almost gentle but his eyes sharp with triumph. "I wondered how long you would pretend to be helpless." Marcus shifted slightly, placing himself between Elira and the guards. She lifted her chin, calm even as her heart raced. "You have no right to be here." Varen's smile widened. "On the contrary, I have every right. You carry human corruption in your flesh, and now you break the law itself." She took one step forward, the soft hum of her braces barely audible. The guards' eyes widened as they realized she was standing. Walking, Varen's expression turned from mockery to horror. He spat the words like venom. "What have you done? You defile our blood." Marcus moved fast, pulling a smoke charge from his belt and triggering it. The vault filled with a haze of silver mist. The crystal surfaces bent the light, scattering reflections of their forms. He grabbed Elira's hand, the touch brief but electric, and guided her toward the key. She pressed her palm to the crystal. The stone rippled like water, opening under her will. The moment the shard dropped into Marcus's hand, alarms screamed through the chamber. The living crystal roared with light. Varen shouted orders. Bolts of plasma cracked through the haze. Marcus pushed Elira behind a column. A pulse struck his shoulder. Pain flared white. She screamed his name. He gritted his teeth and shoved the shard into her limiter interface. A flash of power surged through her spine. Burning cold and pure, the inhibitor's signal went silent. The chain that bound her for 10 years finally gone. Elira gasped as strength flooded her body, the exoframe responding instantly. She stood tall, not trembling now, her eyes burning with light. The roar of energy around her sounded like the wind of the gods. Marcus leaned against the wall, his vision blurring. "Go," he whispered. She refused. "Not without you." She lifted him with surprising steadiness, guiding him toward the exit. Varen stepped forward, blade drawn, his voice shaking with fury. "You think the people will follow you now? You think they'll bow to a machine?" Elira looked at him, her voice calm and powerful. "They will bow to a queen who walks." She raised her hand and activated the pulse shield Marcus had built earlier. The energy wave pushed Varen and his guards back, scattering them into the walls of light. She turned toward Marcus, eyes fierce. "Hold on." He smiled faintly through the pain, always. They burst into the open air of the outer balcony. The storm above finally breaking into a rain of glowing comet dust. The city below cheering for the procession, unaware that within the palace their future had already changed. Elira looked down at the world she had once only seen from her chair, her chest rising with fierce breath. Marcus watched her, half-conscious, seeing her standing there with light swirling around her legs like flame. He whispered through a fading smile, "Now you're free." She looked back at him, tears mixing with rain. Not yet, not until they all are. Behind them, the palace bells began to toll, each one louder than the last, echoing across the capital. The law of stillness had been broken, and in the silence that followed, the storm answered with thunder that shook the stars. The dawn rose blood-red over Valsaren, the light spilling across the palace towers like the color of awakening and war. The city's joy from the night before had turned into a tense silence. Citizens gathered in the plazas, whispering of what they had seen. A figure on the eastern balcony, glowing with stormlight, walking where none had walked for a decade. The princess of the still throne had risen, and nothing in the world could feel the same again. Inside the palace, every corridor burned with the echo of alarm chimes. Banners of gold and silver trembled under sudden gusts of wind. The priests wailed that prophecy had been broken, that the gods would strike, but others, servants, guards, even some nobles, stood by the windows, eyes wide with hope. They had seen her silhouette framed against the rain, and they whispered her name like it was fire. Elira Marcus woke on a cold infirmary table, his shoulder wrapped in strange silver bandages. The room smelled of ozone and crystal dust. For a moment he didn't remember where he was. Then the pain returned like lightning through bone. He sat up with a groan. The door opened and she was there. No chair, no attendants. Just her, standing alive, radiant in plain robes. Her hair wet from the rain, she smiled softly. "You're awake?" He blinked, her image blurring through exhaustion. "I was afraid I imagined you walking." She shook her head. "Not this time."
She told him what had happened after they escaped.
The regent had sealed the palace gates and summoned the Council of Faith, accusing her of treason and of contaminating royal blood with human craft. The priests demanded her immediate confinement, but before dawn she had stood before them all, her steps steady, her voice clear, and declared that the law of stillness was a lie forged to keep her crippled and the people obedient. Some fell to their knees, some shouted blasphemy, but none could look away. Marcus listened in silence, his mind turning through the weight of her words. "You started a revolution," he said quietly. She nodded, her eyes shimmering with tears she refused to shed. "No, I started a truth." He wanted to believe her, but he knew the regent. Men who build power on fear never surrender it. "You'll need proof," he warned. She looked out the window. "I have proof," she whispered. The data core inside the limiter recorded every signal since it was placed. Every time it was reinforced by order of the Regent's Council. She held up a small crystalline chip. Its glow faint but alive, they both knew what that meant. She could expose the Regent and the law, free her world from the chains of tradition and fear. But it also meant blood. The High Priest had already called for a public trial, a mock hearing in the Great Hall to condemn her for her defiance. She had agreed to attend. Not to plead, but to stand. When the hour came, the palace gates opened to the roar of the people. The hall was vast, walls lined with living crystal that reflected every sound. Every heartbeat Elira entered without her chair, without her guards, only Marcus at her side. His arm still weak but his presence unshakable. The nobles gasped, priests flinched, and the regent watched from his throne with a smile that hid his fury like a blade beneath silk. Elira stopped at the center of the hall, her shadow stretching long beneath the sacred light. "I stand before you as heir of Valsaren," she said, her voice calm but carrying like thunder. "I was told the law of stillness protected me, but it was used to imprison me, to silence my will, and to bind this world in fear." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. The regent rose, his voice smooth as poison. "You speak against the gods themselves. You bring shame to our blood and poison to our people." Elira met his gaze. "The gods gave us minds to build and hearts to rise. If they wished us still, they would not have given us the will to walk." Marcus stepped forward and placed the data chip on the altar. The crystal flared, projecting a ghostly image into the air. Records of the limiter installation, signatures of the Regent's Council, orders marked with his seal. Gasps filled the room. The truth burned brighter than prayer. The Regent's mask cracked. His calm turned to rage. "Seize them," he shouted. But half the guards hesitated. Some turned their weapons away. Then chaos, pure and fast. The Regent's private soldiers stormed in through side passages. Smoke filled the hall. Marcus grabbed Alira's arm and pulled her behind the grate. Columns, she coughed through the dust, her voice sharp. We must reach the balcony. It's the only way to show the city. They ran through the choking haze, her legs moving with perfect rhythm, the exo-braces glowing faintly beneath her robes, every step a rebellion, every breath a declaration. They burst onto the grand balcony, the same place where she had once watched the storms in silence. Now the plaza below was full. Tens of thousands of eyes lifted to her. Lightning crawled across the clouds. The rain swept sideways, the regent appeared behind them, his blade a staff of white fire. You will not defy me before my people, he hissed. Marcus raised his sidearm. The last charge blinking red, he fired once. The blast struck the staff and split it. Sparks raining across the floor. The regent lunged forward, slashing wildly. Alira turned, catching his arm mid-strike. The power from her frame humming through her muscles. The motion almost graceful. She pushed him back, her voice rising above the thunder. You chained me for 10 years. You chained our people for centuries, no more. With a surge of motion, she swung the regent's own broken staff. The impact echoed like a drumbeat. He fell to his knees, his crown clattering across the floor. The guard stopped. The crowd below went silent. For a long moment there was no sound but the storm. Then Alira stepped forward, standing at the balcony's edge. Her robe torn, her face lit by the storm fire. People of Val Seren, she shouted. You were told to be still, to kneel, to fear the law, but the law serves life. Not chains. If I can stand, so can you. The silence broke into a roar. Chants of her name rose through the city. The storm answered with lightning like applause. Marcus stood behind her, watching the impossible become real. The regent was dragged away. The priests fell silent, and Alira turned to Marcus, her eyes soft with grief and triumph. What happens now? She asked. He looked out at the storm and said quietly, Now comes the hardest part, keeping what we just won. She smiled faintly. Then we start with dawn. The bells began to ring again, not an alarm this time, but an awakening. The law of stillness had ended, and somewhere high above the clouds, the storm that had watched them all these years began to fade into light. The sun rose behind smoke that morning, turning the towers of Val Seren into spears of gold and ash. The city was alive with confusion, celebration, and fear. News of the regent's fall had spread faster than any order could stop it. Priests argued in the temples. Soldiers swore new oaths or broke old ones, and across every district, people whispered that the princess who could not walk had stood before the gods and made them bow. Inside the palace, Alira stood by the window of her mother's old chamber, the scent of burnt incense still lingering from the night before. Her robes were torn, her arms bandaged, but her eyes carried something brighter than victory, resolve. She looked down at the streets below, watching her people gather beneath the banners, some cheering her name, others holding their breath as if waiting to see what the new dawn would demand. Marcus entered quietly, the door sliding open with a low hiss. His arm was in a sling, his face still pale from the wound he'd taken, but his posture was steady. He stopped beside her, the silence between them filled with the hum of rebuilding engines outside. They're ready for you, he said, his voice low. She didn't turn. Ready for me or ready for war? He hesitated. Both. The Council of War had gathered in the lower hall. Nobles and commanders who once served the regent now stood divided, some out of loyalty, others out of fear. Alira walked into the chamber with no crown, no armor, only the quiet strength of someone who had already faced death. The room fell silent. The tall stained crystals behind her painted her in light. She spoke slowly, her tone calm. The regent is gone, but his allies remain. The outer provinces will not accept peace easily. They will march against the capital before the next moon. We have to be ready. One of the commanders stepped forward, his scaled face stern. Princess, forgive me, but your people are frightened. They need faith, not battle. She met his gaze without blinking. Faith does not stand when soldiers burn our homes. I will not ask my people to be still ever again. Marcus stood in the corner, watching her command with the same precision he had seen on battlefields. Her words were not loud, but they carried weight. He could see the mixture of admiration and unease in the council. A human by her side was still a symbol too heavy for many to accept. When the meeting ended, Alira turned to him, walking close. I saw it in their eyes. They trust me, but they don't trust you. He smiled faintly. That's nothing new. She shook her head. But I do, and that is enough. They spent the following hours preparing defenses. Marcus moved through the palace hangars with a small team of human engineers who had come from the Terran patrol ship that answered his beacon days earlier. The ship now floated above the city, its engines humming like distant thunder, a promise and a warning. They worked on upgrading the palace shields, integrating human adaptive fields into alien systems. Sparks and light filled the air as machines old and new learned to breathe together. That evening, Elira stood with Marcus on the high terrace overlooking the city. The wind carried the smell of metal and ozone. The sky shimmered with the first signs of the enemy's movement in the distance, black ships like insects on the horizon. She tightened her hands around the railing. "They will come for me." Marcus glanced at her. "No, they'll come for what you represent." Her jaw set. "Then we'll give them an answer they can never forget." When the first warning siren sounded, the city fell into ordered chaos. Citizens fled to shelters. Guards took positions along the outer walls. The palace towers lit up with defense grids. The warlords of the outer provinces had sent their fleets without warning, their ships painted with the region's broken crest. The sky darkened as their plasma sails unfolded. Marcus ran through the command hall. Coordinating from the central console, the Terran cutter hovered in orbit, relaying data through the thin veil of storms. Elira entered in battle armor for the first time. The frame of her legs glowed beneath the plates. Every step she took sounded like music of metal and will. The officers straightened instinctively. The sight of their once broken princess walking into battle was enough to silence doubt. The first impact struck the outer shields. A shudder running through the palace, the floor trembled beneath their feet. Elira steadied herself, eyes on the tactical screen. "How long until they breach?" Marcus replied. "Not long if we stay on the defensive, then we won't," she said, her tone cutting through the tension. "Open the forward gates, send a strike force, surprise them before they settle." Marcus turned. "That's suicide." She met his gaze. "It's leadership." He wanted to stop her, but he saw it in her eyes. The same fire that had carried her through pain and fear, the kind that refused to die. She moved toward the launch deck, the storm winds howling as the gates opened to the battlefield below. The sky was chaos, ships burning, lightning dancing across the shields. She led the first charge on the ground herself. The soldiers of Val Seren followed, their banners shining through smoke. Marcus watched from the tower, his heart pounding. Every blast and shockwave reflected in his mind like memory. He relayed commands, adjusted shields, rerouted power. The Terran cutter above sent pulses of covering fire, tearing through enemy lines, through the comlink. Her voice came through, calm even in chaos. "We're holding, Marcus. The people fight like they've already won." His voice broke slightly. "Just don't die proving it." She laughed softly over the static. Too late to promise that. As night fell again, the battle raged on the plains below. Elira's armor gleamed under the lightning as she moved through the storm. Her every motion a declaration that destiny could be rewritten by will alone. Marcus worked without rest, bleeding through his bandage, whispering into the comms, guiding her through enemy flanks. The roar of fire drowned half the city, but still the line held. When the last enemy ship broke apart over the horizon, the clouds parted, the storm began to fade, and the lights of Val Seren shone through smoke like stars being born. Elira stood amidst the wreckage, the metal of her legs scorched, her breath heavy but steady. Marcus arrived minutes later, covered in dust and blood. They looked at each other without words. The silence said everything. She smiled faintly. "We won." He shook his head. "Oh, you did," she reached out, her gloved hand brushing his cheek. "We both did in the distance." The people of Val Seren began to emerge from their shelters, looking to the skies now clear for the first time in years. The warlords were gone, the regent's rule erased, and on the palace terrace the new queen and the human who had taught her to stand watched the dawn rise again. This time not in red but in gold, and though the world still trembled, it was alive with hope, the kind born only after storms, the kind that makes even silence feel like promise. Smoke still lingered above the city when the first light of morning brushed the crystal towers of Val Seren. The wind carried the smell of burnt ozone and iron through the quiet streets where people gathered in silence, their eyes fixed on the palace that had once been a symbol of obedience and fear. Now it stood scarred and broken but alive, banners torn, walls cracked, and yet the air felt lighter, freer, as if the world itself had taken its first breath after a long sleep. Elira stood on the highest terrace, the stormlight fading from her armor, her silver hair glimmering against the dawn, the weight of victory heavy on her shoulders but her heart steady. She could see the horizon where the last of the enemy ships had fallen, trails of fire dissolving into pale clouds. The battle was over, but the war for the soul of her world had only begun. Marcus stood beside her, his uniform scorched, his hands still stained with the dust of the battlefield. Exhaustion lined his face, but his eyes stayed sharp. Watching the city below like a soldier unable to rest, they were both silent. The kind of silence that doesn't come from peace but from survival. When she finally spoke, her voice was soft yet clear enough to carry through the wind. I never thought the day I stood again would be the same day I had to fight for every soul that watched me fall. He looked at her and said quietly, "Maybe that's what standing truly means, not walking without pain, but walking despite it." Below them, the plaza filled with thousands of citizens, soldiers, healers, children clutching broken banners, the sound of their footsteps rising like waves. They didn't chant or shout. They simply looked up, waiting. Hoping for something to begin, Elira stepped forward to the edge of the balcony, the armor on her legs humming softly, the faint blue light of her mechanical braces glowing beneath the gold of her robes. The people gasped, but no one bowed. Instead, they all raised their heads higher. Meeting her gaze, she drew a slow breath, her voice carrying like music over the wind. "My people, for generations we were taught that stillness was purity, that the body must obey law, that the will must yield to fear. But fear built our chains, not the gods. No law can hold a heart that chooses to rise." The crowd moved like a living sea, faces wet with rain and tears. Her tone grew stronger. "Today we stand not as the silent and the broken, but as those who move forward, who choose life over ritual, and hope over silence." Marcus watched her speak. The way her words turned pain into something fierce and sacred. He thought of Earth, of cities that had once been rebuilt from ruins, of people who refused to stay buried under their mistakes. He had seen the same fire before in the eyes of soldiers who fought for something larger than survival. But never like this, never wrapped in the light of alien dawn and truth. When she finished, the people began to kneel, not out of worship but respect, the sound of their movement echoing through the city like thunder. Elira closed her eyes for a moment, letting the wind carry the warmth of that moment across her face. Then she turned to Marcus, her voice barely above a whisper. "We did it." He smiled faintly. "No, you did." She looked at him with soft defiance. "Then who stood beside me when no one else did?" The following days blurred into rebuilding. The palace transformed into a place of work, not worship. Machines hummed beside prayer lamps. Human engineers and alien artisans worked side by side, repairing the shield grids. The priests rewrote the sacred laws under Elira's guidance. The law of stillness was replaced by the law of dignity, decreeing that no life could be chained by fear of progress, that every tool, whether machine or miracle, was sacred if it restored a voice, a step, or a heartbeat. The decree spread across the capital like wildfire, carried by hope, by memory, by the sound of a queen's first steps on stone. Yet for all the light, there were shadows that refused to fade. The outer colonies whispered of rebellion. The high priest had vanished into exile, and deep beyond the silver moons, old powers waited, watching. Elira knew the peace would not last forever, but she no longer feared the coming storms. She had faced one already and found her strength within it. Still, when night came and the palace was quiet, she often found Marcus standing alone on the balcony, staring at the stars, his expression caught between longing and duty. One evening she joined him, the glow of the city painting their faces in soft gold. He spoke first. "Earth has sent word. They want me to return." His voice held no joy, only weariness. She turned her gaze to the stars. "Will you?" He hesitated. "I don't know. My mission was to rescue the lost. Maybe I found something else instead." She smiled faintly, the kind of smile that hides more than it shows. "When I was a child, I used to think the stars were souls that escaped the laws of our world, free to wander. Perhaps yours was meant to cross mine." He looked at her then, and for a moment, time itself seemed to slow. The soft hum of her mechanical legs, the distant sound of the sea wind, the warmth of her words, everything blended into a stillness that didn't feel like the old law, but like peace. He whispered. Maybe it was. When he left days later to meet the Terran fleet, the city gathered to see him off. Ships hovered above the palace, lights sweeping through the mist. Elira walked beside him to the landing platform. No guards, no court, just them. She handed him a small piece of crystal engraved with their symbols intertwined. "The mark of Valseren's new alliance with Earth," she said softly, "a promise between worlds." He took it and smiled, the kind that says thank you without words, then stepped onto the ramp. The engines ignited with a deep rumble, and as the ship lifted into the clouds, Elira raised her head high. her hair flowing in the wind. From that day on, legends spread across both stars and centuries of the human who gave an alien queen her legs back, and the queen who taught her people to walk without fear. Children whispered the story under the same stars that once watched them in silence, and every time a storm passed over Valsaren, the people said it was the sky remembering the night their world learned to stand. The palace lights flickered gently through the mist, the air alive with peace and purpose, and somewhere beyond the edge of the galaxy, a Terran ship carried the memory of a promise that would never fade.